In a quiet village nestled between rolling hills and a winding river, there lived a young woman named Lila. Her days were filled with the hum of routine work at a bustling market, evenings spent with her aging parents, and nights haunted by a restlessness she couldn't name. The world around her seemed to spin faster than she could keep up, each day blending into the next, leaving her with a gnawing sense of being adrift. She longed for meaning, for a way to anchor herself amidst the chaos of her thoughts. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and violet, Lila wandered to the edge of the village, where an ancient banyan tree, its sprawling branches seemed to hold the secrets of centuries, and beneath it sat an old monk, his robes faded, but his eyes bright with a quiet knowing. Lila had seen him before, always alone, always serene, as if the world's troubles could not touch him. Curiosity drew her closer, and she sat across from him, the cool earth grounding her. She spoke of her unease, her voice trembling with the weight of unspoken fears. The monk listened, his silence a gentle invitation for her to pour out her heart. When she finished, he smiled softly and said, "The mind is like this river before us, always moving, sometimes turbulent, sometimes calm. But its nature is to flow. To find peace, you must learn to sit by the river, not chase it." Lila frowned, unsure of what he meant, but his words lingered like a melody she couldn't yet hum. He told her a story of a young merchant from long ago, a man consumed by ambition. This merchant traveled far and wide, amassing wealth but losing sleep, his heart heavy with worry about what tomorrow might bring. One day he met a teacher who spoke of karma, not as a ledger of good and bad, but as the ripples of intention that shape the world. Every thought, every act, the teacher said, is a seed planted in the garden of your life. Tend it with care, and it will bloom into peace. The merchant, skeptical but desperate, began to pause each day, reflecting on his choices, noticing how his anger or greed stirred unrest, while his kindness brought ease. Slowly his heart grew lighter, not because his life changed, but because he saw it clearly. Lila listened, her breath slowing as the monk's voice wove through the evening air. He spoke of mindfulness, of watching the mind without judgment, like observing clouds drift across the sky. Karma is not fate, he said. It is the dance of cause and effect. When you meet it with awareness, you choose the steps. He invited her to return each evening, to sit by the banyan tree and simply notice her breath, her thoughts, the world around her. Lila agreed, though she wasn't sure why. As she walked home under the starlit sky, something stirred within her, a flicker of hope, fragile but real. The restlessness was still there, but for the first time it felt less like a burden and more like a question waiting to be answered. The days that followed found Lila returning to the banyan tree each evening, her footsteps lighter with anticipation. The monk was always there, his presence steady like the tree itself, and together they sat in silence, watching the world unfold. At first, Lila's mind raced thoughts of unpaid bills, her mother's frail health, the sharp words she'd exchanged with a friend at the market. But the monk taught her to notice these thoughts without clinging to them, to let them pass like leaves on the river's surface. You are not your thoughts, he said, but the one who sees them. One evening, as crickets sang in the dusk, the monk shared a story from the Buddha's teachings. Long ago, a man carried a heavy load across a desert, his back bent under the weight of his possessions. Exhausted, he met a sage who asked, "Why do you carry so much?" The man replied, "Because I need these things to be happy." The sage smiled and said, "Happiness is not in what you carry, but in what you release." The man, reluctant but weary, set down his load and found his steps lighter, his heart freer. The desert, once oppressive, became a place of possibility. Lila thought of her own burdens, the expectations she placed on herself, the fear of disappointing her parents, the pressure to be more, do more. The monk's words echoed, "What you hold tightly holds you back." He guided her to practice mindfulness in her daily life, not just under the tree, but in the market, at home, in every moment. When she washed dishes, she focused on the warmth of the water, the rhythm of her hands. When anger flared, she paused, breathing deeply, watching the emotion rise and fall. Slowly, she began to see how her reactions shaped her days, how a harsh word to a neighbor lingered as unease, while a smile offered freely returned as warmth. Karma, the monk explained, was not a distant force, but a living truth. Every choice, every intention sent ripples outward, touching others and returning to her. Act with kindness, he said, not for reward, but because it aligns your heart with the world's quiet rhythm. Lila began to notice these ripples in the gratitude of a customer she helped, in the softened lines on her father's face when she listened patiently. The world hadn't changed, but her place in it felt different, as if she were no longer fighting the current but flowing with it. As she left the tree one night, the moon casting silver light across the path, Lila felt a stillness within her, fragile but growing. She was beginning to understand that wisdom wasn't found in answers, but in the space between questions, where clarity bloomed. Lila's evenings under the banyan tree became a sanctuary, a place where time seemed to soften and the weight of the world felt lighter. The monk's teachings wove themselves into her days, like threads of a tapestry she was only beginning to see. She noticed how her mornings at the market, once a blur of noise and haste, now held moments of quiet connection, a shared laugh with a vendor, a kind word to a stranger. Yet there were days when the old restlessness crept back, especially when life pressed harder. Her mother's health worsened and the bills piled higher, whispering doubts that mindfulness alone couldn't silence. One twilight, as the air grew cool and the first stars appeared, the monk sensed her unease. He spoke of a farmer from an ancient tale, a man who toiled endlessly to protect his crops from drought and flood. The farmer's heart grew heavy, for no matter how hard he worked, the seasons were unpredictable. One day, a wandering monk passed through and saw his struggle. "Why do you fight the seasons?" the monk asked. "They come and go, as all things do. Plant your seeds with care, but trust the earth to do its part." The farmer learned to work with the land, not against it, and in time, his fields flourished, not because the rains were kinder, but because he met each season with acceptance. The monk turned to Lila, his voice gentle as the evening breeze. "Life, like the seasons, brings what it will. Mindfulness is not a shield against hardship, but a way to meet it with grace. Karma teaches us that our actions shape the path, but attachment to outcomes binds us." He invited her to reflect on her worries, not to push them away, but to hold them lightly, like a bird that might fly when ready. Lila began to practice this, sitting with her fears about her mother, her future, her place in the world. She noticed how clinging to control tightened her chest while letting go, even slightly, brought a breath of ease. At home, she sat with her parents, listening more deeply, her presence a quiet offering. When her mother spoke of pain, Lila didn't rush to fix it, but held her hand, letting the moment be. She saw how these small acts, listening, breathing, being created ripples of calm, not just for her but for those around her. The monk's words lingered. Wisdom begins when you see that peace is not found in changing the world, but in changing how you meet it. As Lila walked home, the village lanterns glowing softly, she felt a subtle shift. The restlessness was still there, but it no longer ruled her. It was as if she were learning to dance with life, step by careful step. The seasons turned, and Lila's visits to the banyan tree became as natural as the rise and fall of her breath. The monk's teachings had taken root, not as grand revelations, but as quiet truths that unfolded in the ordinary moments of her life. She began to see her days as a series of choices, each word, each act, a brushstroke on the canvas of her existence. Yet, there were times when the weight of those choices felt heavy, especially when old wounds surfaced. A childhood memory of her father's harsh words, a falling out with a friend she hadn't spoken to in years, these lingered like shadows, stirring doubt about whether she could truly change. One evening, as fireflies danced in the warm air, the monk shared a story of a woman who carried a basket of stones, each one etched with a grudge or regret. She walked for years, her back bent, her heart weary, until she met a teacher who asked, "Why do you carry these stones?" The woman replied, "They are my story, my pain." The teacher nodded and said, "They are yours only as long as you hold them. Set them down and your story becomes one of freedom." The woman hesitated, fearing she'd lose herself without her burdens, but one by one, she placed the stones by the river, offering them to the current. With each release, she stood taller, her heart lighter, until she walked on. The monk's eyes met Lila's, his voice soft but steady. "Karma is not just what you do, but what you carry. Forgiveness of others, of yourself, is an act of letting go, a seed of peace planted in the present." He spoke of mindfulness as a mirror, reflecting the heart's quiet truths. When you sit with your pain, you see it clearly not as a chain, but as a teacher. Lila began to practice this, sitting under the tree, bringing to mind her father's words, her friend's silence. She breathed through the ache, noticing how it softened when she didn't fight it. She wrote a letter to her friend, not to send, but to release, and felt a knot in her chest unravel. At home, she spoke to her father, not of the past, but of now small, honest words that built a bridge. She saw how her choices, rooted in awareness, reshaped her relationships, not through force, but through presence. The monk's teaching echoed, "The heart that forgives is the heart that is free." Lila felt this freedom growing, a quiet strength that didn't erase the past, but wove it into something new. As she left the tree, the night sky vast above her, she carried a sense of possibility, as if each step were a chance to begin again. Lila's life began to feel like a river finding its course, steady yet ever-changing. The lessons from the banyan tree had woven themselves into her days, guiding her through the market's chaos, her mother's quiet struggles, and her own moments of doubt. She no longer saw mindfulness as a practice confined to stillness, but as a way of being awake, intentional, alive in each moment. Yet, as the village prepared for its annual festival, a time of celebration and reflection, Lila faced a new question. how to carry this inner peace into a world that often felt fragmented and fleeting. Under the banyan tree, with the scent of jasmine lingering in the air, the monk shared a final story. Long ago, a traveler sought a fabled city of eternal peace, believing it lay beyond mountains and rivers. He journeyed for years, facing storms and deserts, only to find the city was a simple village, its people living with quiet joy. When he asked their secret, an elder said, "Peace is not a place you find. It is a way you walk. Every step, every choice builds the world you seek." The traveler realized his journey had shaped him, not because he found the city, but because he learned to move through the world with a steady heart. The monk looked at Lila, his voice a gentle current. Karma and mindfulness meet in the present, where wisdom is born. Each moment is a chance to plant a seed of kindness, of clarity, for yourself and others. He spoke of the festival, where the village would come together, each person bringing their joys and sorrows. "Be there fully," he said, "not as someone seeking peace, but as someone who carries it." Lila understood this as an invitation to live her practice not in solitude, but in the messiness of life, with others in community. During the festival, Lila moved through the crowds, her heart open. She helped a child find her mother, shared food with a weary traveler, danced under lanterns with her parents, her mother's smile brighter than it had been in months. Each act felt like a ripple, small but boundless, touching lives she might never know. She saw how her presence, grounded in awareness, could light a spark in others just as the monks had in her. The teachings of karma, of intention shaping reality, merged with mindfulness, creating a quiet strength that felt like home. As the festival ended and the village grew still, Lila stood by the river, the banyan tree's silhouette against the starry sky. She no longer sought answers, for she had found a way to live the questions. Wisdom, she realized, was not a destination, but a journey, one step, one breath, one moment at a time.